Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Stacey Mitchell. Stacey Mitchell was born in Dorset, England, into a loving and close-knit family with an older brother and two younger sisters. When she was 10, her family moved from the UK to Australia. Stacey was cheerful and friendly. She always sought to help her family and learn new things. Stacey enjoyed meeting new people and was known for her sociable and sweet nature. As she entered her teenage years, Stacey became friends with two older girls, Jessica and Valerie, through a mutual friend. Jessica was 19 and Valerie was 21. Stacey was drawn to them because they were different from her other friends. Valerie was interested in the vampire subculture and claimed to have been drinking blood since she was 10, starting with her own and later trying someone else's. As Stacey entered her teenage years, she started to argue with her parents more often and lost interest in playing with her younger sisters. After these arguments, she would feel hurt for a long time or isolate herself in her room, believing her parents didn't understand her. On December 7, 2006, Stacey turned 16 and made the decision to run away from home. When teens run away, police often reassure and calm their parents by explaining that their children are growing up and need time with friends. They often tell parents that their children will eventually return home and that there is no need to panic about their safety. Although Stacey's parents loved her and worried about her, they did not react strongly when she left. To avoid further damaging their relationship with her, they chose to leave her at a friend's house for a while before calling the police. However, after 6 days, she had not returned home. This worried her family and they reported her missing to the police on December 13, 2006. Stacey had previously planned to move in with her new friends, Jessica and Valerie, who were both older than her. They rented a spacious house in the suburbs with their boyfriends. They generously offered her a spare bedroom for only $20 a week. On December 14th, Stacey moved into her friend's house. She appreciated the freedom of living without rules or conflict. Since her friends were older, she felt confident that they could help her if she needed it. Stacey was then officially reported missing for several days, during which time her family continued to search for her and hoped for her safe return. Despite their disagreements, her parents loved her and wanted the best for her. After searching for Stacey, her parents found her and were able to contact her on December 17, 10 days after she left. During their phone call, Stacey informed them of her whereabouts. In an effort to improve their relationship, her parents chose not to force her to come home immediately. They wanted to rebuild trust and avoid making her feel pressured or uncomfortable. After the conversation, Stacey assured her parents that she would be home the next day. It was agreed that she would stay with her friends one more night before going home. Her parents arranged to meet her at the train station. However, when Stacey's parents arrived at the train station the next day, Stacey was not there. They thought that perhaps she had changed her mind about going home or just didn't want to come with them. They waited to make sure Stacey wasn't late, but in the end, they went home, unable to understand what had happened. After Stacey did not show up, her parents provided the police with all the details about where she said she was staying, including the names of the people she was with. Unfortunately, her parents' worst fears came true just a few days later. On December 21st, a body was discovered and confirmed to be Stacey's. Her body was located inside a large rolling plastic trash can behind a house. The truth about Stacey's murder shocked her family and friends. They discovered that her new friends had planned to kill her just one day after she arrived at their home. Stacey's upbeat attitude and belief that, as older friends, Valerie and Jessica would help her. Stacey often walked around the house in her underwear and frequently entered Jessica and Valerie's room, which angered her friends. Stacey's behavior became a problem for them. Another roommate, David, added to the tension by telling Jessica and Valerie that Stacey made negative comments about his friends and judged their actions. In response, Valerie suggested that they should not let anyone interfere in their lives and decided that they needed to find a way to eliminate the problem with Stacey. However, instead of simply asking her to leave, they considered a darker solution, which was to kill her. The friends began discussing their plan to kill Stacey and informed David of their intentions. David said that on December 17th, he found Jessica crushing glass in a stone bowl in the laundry room. When he asked what she was doing, Jessica frankly explained that they intended to mix the glass into Stacey's food. David expressed his concerns, saying that this method would cause Stacey to die a painful and prolonged death. The glass shards could damage her intestines, leading to pain and loud screaming that could alert the neighbors. In response, Jessica suggested that if Stacey screamed too much, they could bury her head in the ground to silence her. David was asked to join in, but he refused. Then they suggested he just stand there and watch. Stacey had spoken with her parents and was set to meet them on December 18th to go home. She informed David, Valerie, and Jessica about her plans, but they seemed unwilling to change their own plans. David expressed that he felt relieved Stacey would be leaving but did not try to persuade his friends to abandon their scheme. Later that evening, Stacey, Valerie, Jessica, and David went to the local bridge. There was a highway nearby, and they amused themselves by throwing bottles at cars and running away when they interfered with traffic. That night, the four of them returned to the house and sat at the kitchen table drinking whiskey. Stacey complained of a headache, so Jessica gave her a pill, claiming it was a painkiller. In reality, it was a sleeping pill meant for insomniacs. Valerie warned David to go into the bedroom and play loud music. After Stacey took the pills, David noticed Valerie playing music and starting to dance. David decided to go into the bedroom, leaving Valerie, Jessica, and Stacey to continue drinking whiskey while he played loud music in his room. Stacey tries to join the girls in the dance, but Valerie tells her to sit down. Suddenly, David heard Jessica scream, followed by a loud noise and Stacey's scream. It turns out that Valerie has hit Stacey on the head with a concrete block. Jessica calls David, who is terrified. Valerie hits Stacey with the concrete block several more times and then calls Jessica. Jessica paced back and forth between David and Valerie, watching from the doorway to see what Valerie was doing to Stacey. She played music in David's room, sometimes lowering it to talk to him and other times raising the volume to drown out Stacey's screams. Stacey called for help, but David did not respond to her pleas. Stacey crawled to his bedroom door and clung to it, but David slammed the door shut. He told Jessica that he couldn't bear to witness the situation anymore and wanted to leave. Jessica then blindfolded David with a black t-shirt and guided him past Stacey and out of the house. She instructed him to keep walking until it was over, promising to call him later. David was aware that a murder was taking place inside, but instead of intervening, he chose to run away. The concrete block that Valerie used to strike Stacey repeatedly broke, but Valerie continued the assault. Eventually, Jessica joined in. She removed her belt and used the chain to strangle their friend. Despite her last efforts to breathe, Stacey was unable to overcome Jessica's grip and soon lost consciousness. Jessica and Valerie, thrilled with their success, embraced and headed to the table where unfinished whiskey awaited to celebrate. 20 minutes later, Jessica checked Stacey's pulse and confirmed she was still alive. The kitchen was a chaotic scene, with blood splattered everywhere, so Valerie grabbed some sponges and a mop to start cleaning. After about 30 minutes, Jessica checked Stacey's pulse again, but this time the girl had died. Around 1:30 a.m., David called to ask if everything was finished. Jessica replied that Stacey was dead, but they needed more time to clean up, so she suggested David walk around for a couple more hours. He agreed and spent the next 2 hours waiting for the go-ahead to return. The two friends started cleaning up, and surprisingly, they recorded the entire murder on video. While drinking and tidying up, they laughed and made fun of Stacey's accent. Jessica filmed herself laughing and dancing as she cleaned, with Stacey's body on the floor. At 3:20 a.m., Jessica called David to let him know the house was still a bit messy, but he could come over. He was blindfolded again and brought into the room. By that time, Valerie and Jessica had already moved Stacey's body and hidden it in a dumpster behind the house. They then planned how to dispose of it. In the morning, they went to a local hardware store with David to look for a chainsaw and some shovels. On December 21st, police arrived at Jessica and Valerie's home. Jessica escaped by running out the door, while Valerie stayed inside and gave the police a false name. She and David claimed that Stacey had abandoned them and that they did not know her whereabouts. 3 hours later, after discovering Valerie's real name, the police returned to the house. This time, only David was present, and he confessed that Valerie and Jessica had killed Stacey and revealed the location of her body, which was in a plastic wheelie bin behind the house. After the three were arrested and taken to prison, Valerie was placed in a cell with an inmate named Rochelle Van Roos, with whom she conversed about various topics. Rochelle later recounted hearing Valerie tell a story about murdering a young girl. What was striking was that Valerie showed no remorse or guilt. In fact, she seemed proud of what she had done. Valerie claimed that she and Jessica were excited about the murder and then celebrated by drinking, feeling relieved to be rid of that annoying girl. Valerie later confirmed this, saying that Stacey had made them angry and deserved it. She mentioned that she and Jessica had beaten Stacey about 180 times. In a letter from 2007, Jessica confessed that when the murder of Stacey began, she felt like she was no longer herself. She had never felt such a strong craving for blood before, and that something had changed inside her at that moment. When Stacey's blood splattered on her, it was as if a veil had been placed over her eyes, making it impossible for her to stop. Based on their letters and stories in prison, it is clear that none of them felt remorse for their actions. Valerie and Jessica showed no remorse for their actions towards Stacey. They were indifferent to Stacey's family's pain. They laughed throughout the trial, showing a lack of respect for the court. Valerie's lawyer argued that she suffered from a severe personality disorder and referred to her troubled upbringing, raised by an abusive father who had been jailed for assaulting his wife. At the age of 10, she became fascinated with vampire culture and developed a fascination with drinking human blood. In March 2008, Jessica Stasinowski, Valerie Parashumdi, and David admitted their guilt for the crime. David was given a 2-year prison sentence for his role, while Jessica and Valerie received life sentences in a maximum security prison with a minimum of 24 years before they could apply for parole. Valerie tried to appeal her sentence, but the appeal was rejected. After the trial, the friends were sent to different prisons. They tried to stay in touch by sending letters through a fellow inmate named Catherine Burney, but their communication gradually decreased. In 2009, 3 officers were injured while breaking up a fight between Valerie and another inmate. In 2013, Valerie attempted to escape from prison but was unsuccessful. Stacey's family is still grieving her death and feels guilty for not being able to protect her. Even years later, her father shared with reporters that it was very hard for him and that he thought about it every day, wondering what he could have done differently. He mentioned that by now, she could have had a child, and he often imagined what the child would look like. He expressed that it was heartbreaking that they would never see her grow older. The tragic story of 2 friends who took pleasure in killing Stacey is deeply unsettling. Stacey had a disagreement with her parents and turned to older friends for support, but instead of offering help, they expressed their irritation with her. David, known to be a gentle and shy man, failed to act to prevent the murder, despite having the opportunity. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Wirtz. After Rebecca and her husband divorced, she and her daughter, Jennifer, moved to the Somerset Tower residential area. She purchased an apartment in a 7-story building in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Jennifer felt that her mother was having a hard time during this period, and she thought that it had something to do with her parents' divorce. However, Rebecca's loneliness didn't last long. She soon met Charles, a worker at the complex, and they began a romantic relationship. Charles was an eccentric and cheerful man who often joked around. Before long, Charles moved in with Rebecca. Initially, she felt this was a positive change after the emotional hardships of her divorce. She appeared to enjoy her new relationship. However, Charles's behavior soon became concerning. His mood swings were drastic. He could go from laughing hysterically to becoming angry. He started to seem unpredictable and strange. Charles worked on weekends, and during this time, Jennifer saw the true nature of he. Charles began harassing her and quickly progressed to sexual violence. At just 7 years old, Jennifer realized that something terrible was happening. Little girl mustered the courage to tell her mother, Rebecca, about it. However, Rebecca didn't believe her daughter. Rebecca dismissed her claims, telling her that she was imagining things, which caused she to resent her mother. Rebecca never took any action against Charles, not even to investigate her daughter's allegations. As a result, the abuse continued regularly. Jennifer felt so miserable that she didn't want to go home after school because her mother was not supportive. This situation persisted for 3 years. On February 26, 1991, police contacted Rebecca to ask for information about her missing neighbor, Dee Dee Rosenthal. Detectives interviewed everyone in the area to gather information about Dee Dee. That same day, they also questioned a local rapist named Charles. He surprised them by claiming he did not know Dee Dee, despite the fact that they had been neighbors for a long time. As an employee of the complex, he should have seen her regularly at work. Dee Dee Rosenthal, 32, is a therapist who specializes in supporting children with autism. Her colleagues, patients, neighbors, and family all spoke highly of her, indicating that no one would wish her harm. Dee Dee had moved from Canada to the United States less than a year before her disappearance. Witnesses reported seeing her for the last time on February 22, and since then, there had been no leads. Investigators spoke not only with neighbors but also with Dee Dee's family. Her brother, Blaine, mentioned that Dee Dee had aspirations of attending the Alvin Institute in Philadelphia, a dream she had since college, which motivated her move to the U.S. The Alvin Institute is a specialized clinic designed to help children with autism. Blaine expressed disapproval of Dee Dee's decision to move to the United States, feeling that it was a harsh place and very different from Canada and their familiar traditions. He admitted to the police that he tried his best to prevent her from leaving for a foreign country, but she was very determined, took everything for granted, and believed she would be able to return home soon. Witnesses reported seeing a woman who resembled Dee Dee, but identified her as Lori. Unfortunately, these leads did not yield any results. Ultimately, his hopes were not realized, and Dee Dee vanished without a trace. At the beginning of the investigation, the police focused on 2 suspects, both of whom worked at the apartment complex where Dee Dee disappeared. The first suspect was Steve Gomez, Dee Dee's boyfriend. The second was Charles Reddish, the man known locally as Crazy Charles. Both men appeared suspicious, but the police lacked concrete evidence against them. Despite this, they remained on the investigators' radar. Charles claimed he spent the entire day on February 22 with his mother and a young girl named Jennifer. Little girl confirmed his alibi, stating he was with her the whole time. The police could not find any evidence to charge Charles. However, some detectives noticed Jennifer's fear when they mentioned him. This caught the attention of investigators, but they could not take any action against Charles without further evidence or testimony. The Wirtz family experienced several years of suffering and humiliation after a mysterious incident, which ultimately led them to move out of the apartment complex. While this may make people suspicious, the act actually stems from anxiety about the possibility of a crime happening around them. Many residents chose to leave for their safety because rumors of Dee Dee's disappearance had spread quickly. People were eager to distance themselves from the possibility of living near a potential criminal. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation. As they gathered more information, they encountered increasingly conflicting clues. Forensic experts examined the home of Dee Dee, but found it completely empty. The apartment was clean and tidy, with no signs of forced entry or a struggle. However, the front door was unlocked, which was unusual for a missing person case. Despite their efforts, forensic experts found no evidence of blood. It appeared as if Dee Dee had calmly left her apartment, as her belongings were untouched and her car was still parked outside. The only clue investigators discovered was an $80 check hidden in a diary, but there was no cash in her purse or wallet. All clues pointed to Dee Dee having left her home voluntarily. Investigators learned that she had financial difficulties, often spending more than she earned and have a lot of debt, but these problems do not appear to be serious enough to involve kidnapping or murder. However, it raised the question, did Dee Dee leave to escape her creditors? After interviewing all of Dee Dee's neighbors, detectives uncovered a concerning claim from one elderly woman. She reported that on February 22nd, around 4 a.m., she was awakened by a loud thud from the ceiling, which she later realized was caused by Dee Dee, her upstairs neighbor. The sound startled her, but after a brief silence, she assumed it was just something that had fallen and returned to sleep. Meanwhile, all the other residents provided no useful information, leaving the investigation at a standstill. Dee Dee's sudden disappearance captured public attention, and the media began extensively covering the story. However, due to a lack of evidence, the case remained unresolved for years. The Wirtz family later moved into a new home north of Cherry Hill. Rebecca and Jennifer felt so sad for Dee Dee, but they never knew what happened to her. Over time, they, like others, gradually forgot about Dee Dee, including the police, who suggested she might have returned to Canada. Dee Dee's brother Blaine is not satisfied with this explanation and continues to search for her. Unlike everyone else, he is the only one who doesn't give up. He's frustrated by law enforcement's inability to provide answers or locate Dee Dee. He spent years visiting local bars, restaurants, and neighbors' apartments around Hill 67, interviewing anyone who might have information. Eventually, Blaine admits that his relentless search has become a kind of obsession, causing him to lose almost everything, including his family. One day, upon returning home from another search, his wife told him she wanted to break up, marking the end of their relationship. Life was challenging for the Wirtz family after they moved to a new home. They understood why Charles was called crazy. He often acted inappropriately and hurled insults at Rebecca and Jennifer. His aggression was escalating, and although Jennifer never witnessed he physically harm her mother, Rebecca, but little girls suspected that her mother was also suffering from his abusive behavior. However, they stayed together and Rebecca endured the troubles of the relationship. For years, Jennifer suffered from the pain of his abuse, and little girl knew her mother was enduring the same. Despite everything, Rebecca was not ready to leave him. Jennifer spent a lot of time trying to convince her mother, Rebecca, to leave Charles. Eventually, little girl succeeded in persuading her mother that their toxic relationship needed to end. They planned an escape and decided to move in with Jennifer's grandmother, a place Charles had never visited, which would keep them hidden. Jennifer was thrilled with this plan. Little girl looked forward to being free from Charles, the man who had tormented her for so long. It seemed like they were on the verge of freedom. However, Rebecca made a critical mistake by inadvertently revealing their plans to Charles. It was Jennifer's last day at school. Following Rebecca's request, little girl had secretly packed her belongings in advance and hidden them. According to their plan, Rebecca was supposed to pick her up after school around 6 p.m., right after she finished playing field hockey with her friends. When she went to the parking lot, she was surprised to see not her mother driving, but Charles, and her mother sitting in the passenger seat. Angered, she yelled at her mother, feeling frustrated that her mother never kept her promises. In response, Rebecca simply told she to get in the car and calm down. Inside the car, an eerie silence fell. Jennifer felt a sense of foreboding throughout the journey. Charles watched her intently through the rearview mirror, and she dreaded what awaited her at home. Jennifer worries that he has bad intentions to keep her and her mother by his side. When they got home, Charles seemed normal. He said he wanted to have a farewell party before they left. But Jennifer didn't buy it. Her fears were confirmed when they entered the house and found no dinner prepared. Confused, little girl asked about it, but he stammered a vague explanation, then abruptly stating he needed the car keys to buy groceries and rushed out. Desperate, Jennifer urged Rebecca to seize the moment and escape before Charles returned, sensing something was off. However, Rebecca dismissed her concerns and told her to wait for he to return. He has a surprise for them. Frustrated, Jennifer retreated to her room, lay down on her bed, and eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Jennifer was jolted awake by a loud noise around 2 a.m. Alarmed, she couldn't ignore it any longer. She got up and began to descend the stairs, the noise growing louder. When she reached the doorway, she realized something terrible was happening. The sounds were like violent blows, and little girl felt helpless, not knowing how long this horrifying scene would continue. Rebecca was lying on the floor, while her attacker, Charles, leaned over her, striking her repeatedly. Suddenly, he turned around and saw Jennifer. He grabbed the little girl by her hair and dragged her into the living room, where the violence was happening. As he pulled she past Rebecca, she saw something horrifying. Her mother's face was so badly injured that she could hardly recognize her. Rebecca, 43 years old, had a shattered jaw and a broken arm, and she showed no signs of life. To Jennifer, it looked like her mother was dead. Desperate, Jennifer pleaded with Charles not to harm them and to let them go. But he threw her into a chair in the living room, positioning her directly in front of Rebecca. Then, he picked up a small axe from the floor and slowly approached Rebecca. Panicking, little girl screamed for him to stop. She could hear her mother's labored breathing and realized her mother was still alive. But soon, there were more blows, and he attacking her mother. He was literally chopping into Rebecca with the axe. The smell of blood filled the air. Then, he pulled the sheet off Jennifer and dragged her upstairs to the bedroom. There, he tortured and raped her for 2 to 3 hours. Little girl was powerless to resist and simply prayed for it all to end. After Charles finished his torment, he sat next to Jennifer on the bed. She was badly injured and covered in blood, but she was still alive. Then, he asked her to kill him. Jennifer replied that she couldn't do that. He suddenly declared that he would kill her and then end his life, as he didn't want to end up in prison. Terrified, Jennifer didn't want to take a life, even one as evil as Charles's. Although she felt helpless, she remembered methods she had seen in crime shows about negotiating with hostage takers, and she decided to apply them. Little girl focused on listening calmly to he. She aimed to show empathy, hoping to soothe him, and gradually convinced him not only to spare her life but also to reconsider taking his own. Jennifer advised Charles that it would be a good idea if he told the police the truth, saying that he had lost control and was acting erratically. Besides, he could also negotiate with the prosecutor to get a reduced sentence. However, he feeling uncertain, began pacing back and forth in the bedroom, holding a bloody axe. For the first time, he understood the severity of what he had done. Little girl managed to persuade he to surrender to the police, and then she called 911 for help. She was clearly in shock and found it difficult to express one's thoughts. Charles even assisted Jennifer's in getting up, dressing, and walking to the porch. The dispatcher informed them that the police were on their way, and they just had to wait. It's difficult to imagine what Jennifer was feeling during this time. She knew that he was unpredictable and could harm them at any moment. Despite this, little girl waited calmly for the police to arrive. Then, they quickly separated she from Charles. One of the detectives investigating Charles recalled his unusual reaction when asked about Rebecca's location. He vaguely stated she was inside the house and, when asked if she needed an ambulance, he claimed she can no longer be helped. Despite his assertion, it was clear that help was urgently required. A detective from the Cherry Hill Police Department arrived at the scene. This was the same officer who had investigated Dee Dee's disappearance 4 years ago. He remembered a repairman named Charles, who had caught his attention back then, and now he decided to question Charles's again. The police, along with Charles, entered the house equipped with a tape recorder to document the incident. They aimed to piece together the horrifying incidents that had taken place there. During the questioning, both the accounts of Charles and Jennifer aligned, until Jennifer disclosed the rape and torture that took place in her bedroom. Charles completely denied these allegations, he seemingly unable to accept the reality of what he had done to she. When the police mentioned the rape, he laughed, dismissing the idea of being intimate with Jennifer, a 14-year-old girl, as ridiculous. However, as the interrogation continued, he confessed to everything. Detectives from the Cherry Hill station suspect Charles has vital information about Dee Dee's case. Knowing that it was easy to get information out of Charles, they questioned him again about the disappearance of Dee Dee, who had been gone for 4 years. Their intuition was right, and he began confessing. He revealed that early one morning, he entered Dee Dee's apartment through the roof, descending onto her balcony. His intention was to rob and assault her. However, she caught him in the act. Then, in the struggle, he attacked her, raped her, and subjected her to mistreatment. He feared that she could identify him and report him to the police. To eliminate this risk, he decided to kill her. Charles explained that they fought on the bed, and during the struggle, Dee Dee fell to the floor. The loud noise of her fall was heard by a neighbor below. After that, he strangled her with a pillow and fled the scene. He had stolen $80 from her apartment, which the police found the next day. Subsequently, he returned to the scene, wrapped Dee Dee's body in a sheet, and transported it to the parking lot in a grocery cart. He also gathered her belongings and disposed of them in a nearby dumpster. After confessing to both murders, Charles led police to where he hid Dee Dee's body. But unfortunately, he couldn't recall the exact location. However, the police still believed him because he provided specific details about the crime that only the perpetrator could have known. He claimed to have taken Dee Dee to the Delaware River area, and he disposed of the body in a spot known for frequent waste dumping. During the 4 years Dee Dee's body lay there, thousands of tons of garbage accumulated, making the search extremely difficult. Despite extensive efforts, but the remains of Dee Dee were never found, and the search was eventually discontinued. Charles faced 2 trials for the murders. After the search concluded, both cases were assigned to a prosecutor from Hill. Following the initial meeting with the lawyer, Charles, apparently on the advice of his defense attorney, withdrew his earlier confessions to the murders. In any case, a confession alone is not enough to result in a conviction in the state of New Jersey. To achieve a conviction, any oral confession must be accompanied by specific and credible evidence. This means that Dee Dee's murder is unlikely to go unsolved, as the police have little evidence left other than an $80 check. 2 trials took place, one after the other, with Charles as the defendant in both cases. The first trial involved the murder of Rebecca Wirtz and the torture of her daughter, Jennifer. During the trial, Jennifer demonstrated courage and composure as a witness, providing clear and concise answers. The forensic expert testified about Rebecca's severe injuries, which included at least 25 axe blows. Due to the overwhelming evidence against Charles, the jury delivered a guilty verdict after only 40 minutes of deliberation. As a result, Charles received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The second trial involved the death of Dee Dee Rosenthal and presented a more complex situation. Although the prosecutor aimed to achieve a harsher punishment, the difficulty lay in the lack of evidence at the crime scene, which Charles had meticulously cleaned up. Furthermore, Charles retracted his earlier confession and presented an alibi, claiming that Dee Dee had simply moved away to start a new life. This new testimony gave Charles a chance to avoid conviction. However, the prosecutor tried to prove that Dee Dee was not the type of person who would give up everything and go adventuring. She has completely devoted her love to taking care of autistic children and she cannot leave them. Her brother, Blaine, corroborated this, stating that she would have informed him if she had planned to leave. Furthermore, all of her belongings, including her documents, keys, car, and pet cat, were still in her apartment. In Charles's recorded confession, he claimed that Rebecca was the only person who knew about his involvement in Dee Dee's murder. It is unclear why Rebecca chose to keep this a secret. Perhaps she was afraid of Charles or did not believe the truth. He stated in his confession, as well as in a previous conversation with his daughter, that he was under the influence of prohibited substances during both crimes. Charles Reddish was initially charged with Dee Dee Rosenthal's murder in November 1995. 3 years later, in December 1998, he was convicted of the crimes he committed against Rebecca and Jennifer. By March 2001, he agreed to confess to Dee Dee's manslaughter as part of a plea bargain with the prosecution. The terms of the agreement required he to reveal the location of Dee Dee's body. However, at the last minute, he changed his mind and refused to comply. The prosecutor believed that he realized the extent of his crimes and was concerned about additional charges, which led to him changing his mind. Consequently, the plea bargain was withdrawn, and he went to trial again in October 2001. Charles again made false claims that Dee Dee was still alive and mentioned a missing woman named Laura. However, the jury saw through the lie, and he was sentenced to death in 2002. But in 2004, the New Jersey Supreme Court overturned the death sentence. 1 year later, it was replaced with a prison term of 30 to 60 years, which was added to his life sentence for Rebecca and Jennifer. Unfortunately, the body of Dee Dee was never recovered. After the trial, Jennifer was able to start a new life. She moved in with her cousin Shannon. She was finally able to live a peaceful life, free from the years of torture and mistreatment. She attended a Catholic school, joined a support group for young girls who had survived traumatic experiences. Her relatives provided significant support. As she grew older, Jennifer was able to come to terms with the traumatic experiences she had endured. She worked hard, built a successful career, started a family, and became a mother to 2 daughters. Blaine, Dee Dee's brother, held on to hope, despite his failure to find his missing younger sister. Blaine felt relieved to know that justice had been served, and especially that Charles was no longer causing harm to anyone because he was in custody. In tribute to Dee Dee, Blaine established a Canadian foundation in her name, focusing on supporting women who have endured physical and emotional abuse. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jody Jones. Luke Mitchell, born in 1988, was the younger of 2 children. When he was 11, his parents separated, and he stayed with his mother without moving away. The family lived in the small, middle-class town of Eat Houses, Scotland. From a young age, Luke was well-behaved, he enjoyed horseback riding, excelled in school, and had a passion for music. He entered secondary school at St. David. However, during his teenage years, particularly in high school, he began to exhibit unusual behavior. At that time, he met a girl named Jody Jones, who was almost 2 years younger than him. Jody was born in 1989 in another small town in eastern Scotland. The country is generally known for having many small towns located close to one another. Jody was the youngest of 3 children in a middle-class family. Both of her parents worked for the Royal Mail. She was calm, well-mannered, and did well in school. The school director even commented that she had a bright future due to her achievements in class and extracurricular activities. Family was very important to her, and she was a creative person who enjoyed poetry and painting. Jody was close to her eldest sister, Janine. Interestingly, all members of the Jones family had names starting with the letter J, including their parents, James and Judy. The family was decent and appeared genuinely happy until 1998, when the father began experiencing mental health issues and ended his life tragically. This was a devastating blow to the family, and the mother, Judy, had to leave her job to take care of the 3 children. The tragedy affected not only Judy but also the children, who were very worried. Eventually, Janine moved to Mayfield briefly to live with her grandmother, because everything in the house reminded her of the incident. However, after some time, she managed to cope with her problems and returned to her family. Gradually, life returned to normal. Everyone adapted to living without a father, the mother went back to work, and the community supported the family. As a teenager, Jones showed a rebellious streak. She wanted independence and began to experiment with clothes and appearance, listened to heavy rock bands popular at that time, and got herself a piercing. Her mother resisted these changes, particularly when Jody showed interest in alcohol and prohibited substances. She began experimenting with these substances at an early age. Around the time Jody met Luke, they were both 14 years old. The two met at school, became friends, started skipping classes together, and began dating in February 2003. They were deeply in love, and even planned to marry. Jody wrote in her diary that her feelings for Luke were serious and profound, not just a superficial crush. At the start of her relationship, Jody didn't tell her friends or family about her boyfriend, Luke. For some reason, she kept him a secret. This hidden relationship went on for quite some time until she finally decided to share it. She confided in her older sister, Janine, revealing that she had a close relationship with Luke and felt very strong emotions for him. Janine understood the seriousness of the situation and informed their mother, Judy. Judy was of course shocked by the news, but was afraid of pushing her daughter away from her, so she decided to act very carefully. Judy wanted to meet Luke to understand him better, given Jody's deep feelings, and asked Jody to introduce them. In May 2003, Luke returned home with his girlfriend Jody to meet her family and get to know them better. However, things didn't go as planned. Judy learned from Luke that Jody was smoking and drinking with her friends, and Judy also discovered she had tried weed. This makes Judy worried about her daughter's increasingly close interactions and relationship with Luke. Even before the meeting, Judy had looked into Luke's background and learned about some of his unusual habits. Many local people had unfavorable words about him, seeing him as independent and daring, and occasionally rude, though he wasn't involved in any criminal activities. After a brief discussion, Judy was convinced that Luke was a bad influence on her daughter and that their relationship was risky. She forbade them from seeing each other and put her daughter under house arrest until June 30th, hoping this would help her focus on finishing the school year without distractions. However, Judy's plan failed. Luke and Jody continued to meet in secret. Judy found a path Jody used almost daily to sneak out and spend time with Luke. They would kiss near her home and share their frustrations about Judy's strictness. Luke and Jody was eagerly waiting for the end of house arrest to spend their summer vacation together. June 30th finally arrived, and Jody, very much looking forward to it, was thrilled that house arrest would end. She looked forward to seeing Luke and spending time with him freely. As soon as it was 5 p.m., Jody left home. She planned to meet Luke for an evening together. Judy allowed her to go but set a curfew of 8 p.m. However, she did not return home at the appointed time, and Judy couldn't reach her by phone. Worried that something was wrong, Judy began searching for her daughter. When Judy went to Luke's house, Jody was not there. Concerned, she asked Luke about her whereabouts, but he said he hadn't seen her that day. She had not shown up for their meet. This seemed unbelievable, as Jody had eagerly awaited this moment and had hurried to meet him. Judy became angry, suspecting that he was lying. Judy, distraught, did not believe him and demanded he answers, but he insisted he knew nothing. He agreed to accompany Judy to search for she. Luke's parents owned a specially trained dog, so they decided to follow the route she was supposed to have taken. Since there was only one road linking the neighboring towns where they lived, so they searched this route, but did not find she, which was strange. She continued to ignore their calls and messages. Despite this, Judy, Luke, and the dog persisted, keep searching over and over again, but still in vain. Finally, while walking the route again in the dark around 10:30 p.m., the dog picked up a scent in a wooded area and led them there. Luke followed the dog into the forest, using a flashlight. In the distance, he noticed something white on the ground near some walls. As he approached, he made a horrifying discovery. It was Jody's half-naked, disfigured body, tied up. She had been killed in a particularly brutal manner, which deeply shocked both Judy and Luke. Judy became hysterical, trying to aid her daughter, but it was too late. She showed no signs of life, and her body had already cooled. The mother couldn't accept that her daughter was gone. Luke comforted Judy's and called emergency services. Soon after, the police also arrived at the scene, and they were extremely shocked by this discovery. It was a literal bloodbath. Such violence had never occurred in this previously quiet area. Who could commit such a cruel act against a girl? The injuries of Jody resembled those of Elizabeth Short, who was murdered in 1947 in Los Angeles. The girl's body was not only cut in half, but her internal organs were removed. Additionally, on her face was a Glasgow smile, which is a knife cup that extends from one ear to the other. This case is one of the most famous yet to be solved. Due to the similarity of injuries, so the case of the murdered Jody Jones was dubbed Black Scotland by some media outlets. This gruesome incident caused widespread panic among residents of both communities. Locals fear that a vicious maniac has appeared in the area and expect new attacks. To calm the public, police needed to urgently solve the case and incarcerate the dangerous criminal before he struck again. The specially trained dog amazed everyone by leading the search party straight to the body. The girl was found in a hidden spot, known only to her, under a tree, where her and a friend's initials were carved. Some witnesses believed this was not a coincidence but a clue. Jody's body had numerous cuts and stab wounds, primarily on her chest, neck, and head. Her arms had many cuts, indicating she actively tried to defend herself. Her neck was so damaged she was nearly decapitated. She was also severely beaten, with her hair pulled out. The girl was raped, and she died from strangulation. Forensic experts investigated the crime scene and discovered a used condom, along with DNA samples from 3 men on Jody's body. These samples were sent to the lab for analysis. Despite public concerns about a serial killer, the police believed the murder was personal, and Jody was not a random victim. Naturally, suspicion fell on her boyfriend, Luke, whom she was supposed to meet. Typically, those close to the victim are involved in such cases. It was believed that Luke might have been the last person to see her. His calm demeanor and indifference to Jody not meeting him as planned raised eyebrows. Why didn't he call or look for her? Perhaps because he already knew she was dead. Luke was considered suspicious by the police, so they decided to investigate him. Although he had no visible injuries, the numerous defensive wounds on Jody suggested she must have left marks on him. His face and body would likely have been scratched. Jody's mother, Judy, noted that her daughter's rebellious behavior began after meeting Luke, and she blamed him for everything, from her daughter's change in style to her daughter's murder. She claimed that Luke's negative influence had drastically changed her daughter. During that time, Jody behaved so recklessly that she had to be put under house arrest. At school, in addition to her behavioral changes, she experimented with illegal substances. Jody's mother, Judy, believed Luke was directly linked to these issues. Judy also argued that the dog didn't lead Luke to the body. She said he knew the location and led the dog straight to the crime scene. She opposed Luke so strongly that she asked him not to attend the funeral, partly to avoid media attention, as his presence at the service would have drawn interest from local newspapers. Rumors spread rapidly, and by the next day, the whole school knew what had happened. There were claims that Luke was involved in the brutal murder. Luke was known for being eccentric and called himself the town madman, but his oddities were never violent. Police suspect Luke is the one who killed Jody, so they obtained a search warrant for his home to gather evidence and bring charges against him. While searching his room, detectives came across a peculiar picture in numerous bottles filled with urine. They didn't understand why he filled them and kept them at home. He did not provide any explanation for this. And this is just one of many strange things police discovered in his home during their investigation. His home was filled with satanic symbols, and he was notably obsessed with the singer Marilyn Manson. From the point of view of the investigation, all of this is not in the suspect's favor. However, could such eccentricities really indicate he was capable of a violent crime? In spite of his peculiar behavior, Luke denied any involvement in the crime. From the moment the police expressed their suspicions, he insisted that he loved Jody and could never harm her. During his discussion with investigators, he mentioned a hair clip, and this raised suspicion as the hairpin was not seen when her body was discovered. Furthermore, his description of her clothing suggested he saw her later in the day, contradicting his claim that he hadn't seen her after school. According to him, she had different clothes and a hair clip at school, which didn't align with his story. The DNA on the used condom did not match Luke's. However, Luke's DNA was found on Jody's bra among other unidentified samples. The police did not have enough evidence to charge him, but he was still the main suspect in the murder investigation and was called in for questioning. Investigators also spoke with his parents. Local residents' opinion of him turned very negative, and teachers at the school tried to isolate him from other students out of safety concerns but were unsuccessful. After 2 months, Luke returned to his class, not wanting to study separately. Consequently, the school administration had to suspend Luke from classes for the duration of the investigation. For the next 10 months, Luke remained the sole suspect. The police focused exclusively on him and did not consider other potential suspects. Ultimately, based on circumstantial evidence, Luke, 15 years old, was arrested for the murder of 14-year-old Jody Jones. He also faced charges for possessing and carrying a knife in a school setting. One of the challenges in the investigation, besides the lack of evidence, was determining the motive for the murder. The police faced an issue because Luke was below the age of criminal responsibility. Later, it was revealed that the police committed several violations. Specifically, they were criticized for interrogating the 15-year-old without any adults present, such as his legal guardians or parents, and without a lawyer. The boy was pressured and forced to confess. During this time, law enforcement was more focused on building the case and finding evidence of Luke's guilt. They visited his home again and conducted another search of his room. His house was searched 3 times in total. Surprisingly, no blood was found in the house. However, many suspicious items were discovered and later used to accuse he of a brutal crime. Among these items, investigators confiscated a large number of Marilyn Manson CDs and copies of Manson's film Doppelhers. A particular 10-minute scene in the film, where the main character committed a brutal crime against a black dahlia, was of great interest. Many drew parallels between the film and the real tragedy, leading to the belief that Luke was simply imitating his idols. Investigators suspected that Luke might have timed the massacre to coincide with a cult or ritual inspired by his favorite rock bands. He was eventually arrested, bringing relief to the city's residents, who viewed him as a murderer, Satanist, and psychopath, posing a danger to society. His eccentricities were publicly scrutinized, although they had not harmed anyone, until Jodi's murder. Rumors and sensational stories quickly spread. The case was heard in the Supreme Court of Edinburgh. However, Luke denied any involvement in Jodi's death. The prosecution argued that he was guilty of killing his girlfriend Jodi, pointing out that he discovered her body, even though he used a specially trained dog. Jodi's mother claimed that he brought the dog himself. Additionally, a witness reported seeing a man resembling Luke in a khaki jacket with Jodi near the crime scene, hugging, around the time before she passed away. However, this testimony has caused much controversy, as other witnesses reported seeing 2 men, and the witness ultimately could not positively identify Luke. At the trial, Luke's ex-girlfriend testified that he once threatened her with a knife, which frightened her greatly. However, he claimed he had an alibi, but it was unreliable. Luke's brother stated that on the day of the incident, he was alone in the house watching TV. However, their mother, Corinne, said she was at home with Luke at that time, and the brother was just in his room and mistaken. Despite this, the brother insisted he was alone, watching adult films, which he only did when no one else was home. Eventually, Corinne admitted she had lied, and Luke was indeed not at home. They faced consequences for this, and she was even held accountable. So, where was Luke? He never revealed his whereabouts, and it was impossible to track his phone. The prosecution presented a reconstruction of the events. According to the prosecutor, Luke and Jodi met near a tree with their initials a little after 5 p.m. About 50 minutes later, he was seen alone. The prosecution claimed that he was fascinated by the story of the Black Dahlia and had watched a film of the same name, which included a disturbing scene of a massacre. Witnesses mentioned that he occasionally smoked a pipe. Then, he allegedly contemplated acting out something he saw in the film and harmed Jodi. It was also revealed that he possessed a small case containing a knife, engraved with Jodi's initials and her birth and death years. The case also had a note stating that the best day of he was the one that never came, a quote from Kurt Cobain, who was his idol. While none of this directly proves a crime, but the prosecution interpreted these details as suspicious coincidences, all pointing to he. The prosecutor's office believed Jodi had been killed with a particular knife, but the knife vanished and couldn't be found for comparison. Luke couldn't explain its disappearance. Neighbors of Luke testified during the trial that on the evening of Jodi's death, Luke burned something in his backyard. The prosecution suspected that this was how he disposed of the clothes he wore during the crime. Witnesses mentioned that the fire had a strange odor. However, when police searched his house, they found nothing significant. They did confiscate a large steel barrel used for burning garbage. In total, 122 items were confiscated in connection to the case. Notably, a new khaki jacket which a witness had seen disappeared from Luke's house. The prosecutor suggested that he burned it to hide blood stains. The jacket, purchased by his mother shortly before the murder, was last seen on him that day and then mysteriously vanished, raising further suspicions. A witness, a friend of Luke, testified at the trial. He claimed to have had a strange conversation with Luke shortly before the murder. Luke allegedly said that the best way to kill someone was by cutting their throat and mentioned that Luke could imagine killing someone. That day, Luke was texting Jody, with their last message exchange occurring between 16:35 and 16:54. After 1700 hours, Luke called the information service to ask for the exact time. This was puzzling because if he was at home, as claimed, he could have just checked his watch. The lawyers argued that there was no evidence against Luke. Besides Luke's DNA from 2 other men was found at the crime scene. But only one was identified. It belonged to a friend of Janine. The prosecution suggested that these traces were present because Jody wore Janine's shirt. Luke's DNA was on her bras, and her DNA was on his pants, but since they were in an intimate relationship, the presence of their DNA on each other's clothes was considered irrelevant to the murder case. The defense contended that Luke was eccentric, a fact he didn't deny. Yes, he was a rude teenager interested in strange things, but none of these were direct indicators of guilt. The lawyers attempted to demonstrate that he couldn't have committed the crime against his girlfriend. The numerous stab wounds to the throat nearly detached her head from her body. Forensic experts counted about 20 wounds in the neck area alone, while Jody fought back desperately. Luke would have certainly sustained defensive marks, yet no witnesses or police officers noticed any on him during the search. There were no scratches on his face or body. The lawyers argued that he didn't have a motive for murder. He loved his girlfriend and valued their relationship. Why would he murder her, especially on a day when all restrictions imposed by her mother were lifted? They shared a serious romantic relationship filled with tender feelings and rarely argued. It just didn't make sense. The case was highly controversial, ultimately left for the jury to decide. On January 20, 2005, the jury began their deliberation. After about 5 hours, they concluded that Luke was guilty of first-degree murder. On February 11, the verdict stated that the 16-year-old would face at least 20 years in prison before eligibility for parole. However, many still doubted his involvement, believing that 2 people were involved in the murder. This thing allowed he to file several appeals, which were denied. Luke's mother had to sell their house and buy a smaller one to afford the legal fees. She fully supports her son and believes in his innocence. In 2019, a fund was established to raise money to support a man named Luke and to file new appeals on his behalf. However, the site hosting the fund eventually blocked it because it violated the site's terms. Despite these setbacks, Luke remained determined. Since 2003, when he was first accused of killing his girlfriend, he has consistently denied involvement. He made it clear that even if he were offered release in exchange for a confession, he would not accept it because he would never harm Jody, his girlfriend. Luke had numerous supporters who, after hearing the guilty verdict in court, distributed flyers throughout the city proclaiming his innocence. So strong was their support that they even considered storming the prison. Their aim was to highlight what they believed to be Luke's wrongful conviction. However, their approach was questionable. Such actions could potentially harm Luke's case, and they also negatively impacted the Jones family, who were unjustly blamed for the situation and even received threats. In May 2007, the controversial trial resulted in the creation of a documentary about the case, which renewed interest in Luke's case. Moreover, this film revealed numerous irregularities committed by the police in charge of the investigation. Initially, the police considered Luke innocent, although they investigated him as a suspect. However, as more was learned about him, they found unconventional and unknown aspects. Most of the townspeople had a clearly negative opinion. Amid rumors and the extraordinary behavior of the town's eccentric, the investigation ceased to consider other people as suspects. All the evidence was circumstantial. Even Jody's wounds, initially believed to resemble movie cuts, did not match so much. In fact, it was even questioned whether Luke was really a fan of Satanism and Marilyn Manson. He just followed some unpopular trends of his teenage years. To prove his innocence, Luke agreed to take a polygraph test on April 25, 2012. He passed the test successfully. 2 months later, the mother of he also underwent the polygraph test, and experts confirmed that both passed flawlessly. The documentary explored a theory that the murder might have been committed by a student who had written an essay about the murder of a girl in the woods a few weeks before Jody's death. A friend of this student saw him shortly after the crime and noticed scratches on his face. Luke's family believes the investigation overlooked a crucial piece of evidence: condoms containing unknown male DNA. No DNA from Luke was found. They argue that the motive for the murder was rape, with the rapist attacking she and dragging her into the woods. They feel the investigation should focus more on this angle. Additionally, they claimed that when Jody's mother came to Luke's house, he had not yet showered, yet there was no blood on him. They argue that if he were the killer, he would have showered and changed clothes immediately to wash off any blood. Years ago, the crime scene was vandalized with red graffiti referencing Jody's murder. The message included a different name, suggesting that another person might be the murderer. This graffiti is believed to have been painted by Luke's supporters to assert his innocence. Luke's family hired 2 private detectives who identified several suspects, with Mark Kane among them. Mark was a local drug addict who died suddenly in May 2018 at age 38. Witnesses saw him at the crime scene on the day of the murder, with a scratched face and known to carry a knife. He claimed the scratches were from falling into bushes, but no one believed him given the context of Jody's murder. However, despite his suspicious background, all suspects, including Mark, were eventually interrogated and cleared from the list. The family of Jody is certain that the person who killed their daughter is Luke, the one currently in prison. They have no doubt about his guilt. Meanwhile, Luke's family continues their pursuit of justice. Almost 2 decades have passed since his imprisonment, and his legal team has accused investigators of multiple violations, notably the absence of forensic analysis on several DNA samples from Jody, particularly those related to allegations of rape. This significant oversight has cast doubt on the conviction. Luke's lawyers are determined to overturn the sentence. Now 35 years old, Luke might be eligible for parole in 2025. However, he reportedly failed a random test this year. By regulation, after this point, the opportunity for parole will be postponed for another 3 years. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Rita Polite. On December 4, 1998, Michael Polite was at home in the small town of Hopewell, Missouri, United States. At the time, his mother, Rita, was working at a local bar. While she was working her shift, Michael was home alone. Feeling bored, he decided to ride his bike to the nearest store, a supermarket where he often met his friends. When he got there, he ran into his 15-year-old friend, Josh Sansu. Michael invited Josh over and Josh agreed, and Josh spent the night at Michael's house. They passed the time playing chess and video games while they waited. When Michael's mother came home from work, he saw the headlights flashing on the sunroof and realized she was home. After Rita got home, she told the children to go to bed. Michael then woke up near dawn. In his room, he was lying in bed and noticed a strange smoke coming from the crack in the door. Josh, who was sleeping on the floor near Michael's bed, suddenly woke up and looked at him in fear. Michael started calling for his mother, but there was no response. Tensions escalated, and the children began to panic. When they left Michael's room to go to their mother's room, they witnessed a horrifying scene. Josh and Michael saw Rita's legs covered in blood. Their mother's upper body was on fire, Rita was engulfed in flames up to her waist. Without hesitation, Michael ran to get water to put out the fire, calling out to her in the hope that she would answer, but it was too late. Meanwhile, Josh ran to a neighbor's house for help because they did not have a cell phone. By 6:30 a.m., emergency services arrived and firefighters began to put out the fire. After extinguishing the fire, Michael called his sister, Crystal, to share the heartbreaking news. When police arrived at the scene, they found a young man sitting on his bed, in a state of shock. He was unable to stand up and struggled to speak clearly. The horrific sight and smell of burning flesh haunted him forever. Police quickly began an investigation. It was clear that the victim had suffered a traumatic brain injury. She had been struck in the head with a blunt object before being set on fire. The fire chief examined both the body and the crime scene. He quickly determined that gasoline or fuel had been used to start the fire. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the scene but found no murder weapon. Police quickly suspected the son of killing his mother. Rita's death was motivated by cruelty and hatred towards her. Rita was only 40 years old at the time. In addition to Michael, she had two adult daughters, Crystal and Melanie, both in their early 20s. Rita's family lived in Hopewell, Missouri, a town where residents felt safe enough to leave their homes and cars unattended. It seemed like a peaceful haven, untouched by the violence of the outside world. Sadly, even in such places, terrible crimes can still happen. The town had a friendly atmosphere and the crime rate was so low that most locals often left their doors open at night. Michael's mother, Rita, left the door open without considering the potential danger, which may explain why there was no forced entry. The police's attention was now focused on Rita's son, Michael. Michael's parents, Edward and Rita, met when they were young and eventually married. Their first children were twins named Crystal and Melanie. The girls had vivid memories of their father's cruelty. Although Rita loved Edward very much, he often cheated on her and eventually became abusive, both emotionally and physically. Unable to bear this treatment any longer, Rita decided to get the police involved. The children often witnessed their father's violent outbursts, which later led to behavioral problems, especially in Michael. About a year before the massacre, the family dynamics worsened significantly. During this time, Michael witnessed Edward physically attack Rita. He knocked her to the ground with several blows and began to strangle her. Michael and his sisters were terrified for their mother's life. Fortunately, the children managed to distract Edward, allowing Rita to escape from his grip. Following this incident, the family faced many challenges. In the summer of 1998, after over 20 years of marriage, Rita filed for divorce. Edward sought joint custody of their children, but the kids did not want to live with him. Rita chose not to escalate the situation. When filing for divorce, she cited her husband's infidelity but did not mention the years of abuse she endured. As a result, the court awarded shared custody, forcing the children to visit their father, whom they despised. Michael and Josh were taken to the sheriff's office. Although the teens were clearly not ready to talk, the police began an immediate investigation. On the way to the police station, the patrol car driver noticed Michael making strange comments and showing little emotion. Although the body had not been identified, Michael insisted that it was his mother, since there was no one else in the house. The police, ignoring the possibility that Michael might be in shock and not fully comprehending what he was saying, became increasingly suspicious of his involvement in the incident. At the police station, Michael underwent a voice stress test, which is also known as voice stress analysis. After the test, the officers informed him that he had failed, but this could be attributed to the trauma he experienced after witnessing his mother's death. Furthermore, voice stress tests are controversial and their results are often considered unreliable, usually not accepted as evidence in court. The police also took Michael's shoes, and specially trained dogs detected traces of flammable substances on them, suggesting they were used to ignite Rita's body after the murder. The Michael seemed to be attempting to hide his actions. Michael and Josh both claimed they had no idea what had happened. They were questioned without a lawyer present. According to the teenagers, they had been in Michael's room for some time, sleeping, and had not heard anything that had happened. Michael claimed that he had been in bed and had only come out when he smelled smoke. However, the police did not believe their testimony and the questioning became increasingly tense. Both boys remained in custody. Josh's mother went to the police station to support him as much as she could, while Michael's father chose not to support him and did not appear. On the second day, Josh made a statement on video camera in the presence of his mother and several police at once. He explained that he was not sure what had happened, but that he had woken up in the middle of the night just before the fire and found his friend Michael missing. He also admitted that he was fed up with the situation. The police took this as a contradiction to Michael's statement, which meant that Michael was lying. Josh's statement essentially confirmed the police's suspicions of Michael's involvement in his mother's murder. On December 7, 1998, Michael was arrested for the murder of his mother, shocking both him and everyone who knew him. Michael believed that it was a misunderstanding and was confident that he would be proven innocent and released. He maintained his innocence, but this did not convince the police. Michael insisted that he would never harm his mother, whom he loved dearly. Although they had had some recent conflicts, he hoped to gain support from his uncle and aunt, who lived nearby. His uncle, a politician, along with his sisters, sided with him, believing that he could not have harmed his mother. They believed that the investigation should focus on their father Edward. However, Edward was cleared of the crime because he had an alibi. Many people noticed problems in the relationship between Michael and his mother. The family struggled after the divorce. Financial difficulties affected both mother and children, and Michael, a schoolboy, faced challenges during this difficult transition. The police became suspicious because of Michael's behavior, which was hardly exemplary. In 7th grade, he began skipping school frequently. Teachers were concerned that he might not advance to the next grade due to his behavioral problems. About 10 months before the tragic events, Michael's behavior became significantly worse, and witnesses reported that he had threatened Rita. This led to Michael being taken to a psychiatric clinic. However, doctors found no underlying problems and attributed his behavior to puberty and the stress of his parents' divorce. Michael later admitted that threatening his mother was the biggest mistake of his life. Unfortunately, he could no longer apologize or take back his words. Many troubled teens act in similar ways, but not all of them go astray. Michael was not a criminal. He did not associate with bad influences or get into trouble that would make him a potential suspect. Although he denied any wrongdoing, the police were still fully convinced that he was guilty. Years passed as Michael waited for his Supreme Court hearing. During this time, he was in prison and was deemed extremely dangerous, so he was not eligible for bail. Just before the trial started, the prosecutor offered Michael a plea deal for manslaughter. If he accepted, he could face a maximum of 15 years in prison, but he turned it down. Michael maintained his innocence, stating he should not be punished for a crime committed by someone else. He believed the only person capable of harming his mother so brutally was his father, Edward, but no one paid attention to his claims. In January 2002, Michael, who had just turned 17, appeared in court. The prosecutor presented evidence gathered during the investigation, including shoes that had traces of flammable substances used to burn the body. Tests confirmed that gasoline was the substance used. The prosecution argued that the young man had a tendency towards arson. Multiple witnesses reported seeing him play with fire and intentionally destroying objects for entertainment. A friend of the defendant stated that a few hours before Rita returned from work, They had used gasoline to ignite some trash on the railroad tracks. Upon inspecting the crime scene, police found a canister with a small amount of flammable liquid left inside. The defendant's lawyer explained that although gasoline had splashed on Michael's shoes while they were playing with fire, this did not prove he was responsible for the fire in the house. The defendant did not kill his mother or set fire to her body. From the prosecutor, the jury heard about Michael's behavioral issues and possible mental health concerns. However, these were not confirmed during assessments. Before his mother, Rita, died, the young man's threats to her were considered key evidence that he was involved in the murder. Michael's initial belief that he would not go to prison began to wane. The prosecution argued that Michael attempted to end his life about a month after the murder, citing guilt for harming a loved one. A fellow inmate claimed to have heard Michael confess, but he was never brought to the stand to testify. Michael's defense maintained his innocence, but as he down and regained his composure, the jury began to suspect that he was hiding something. A key piece of evidence for the prosecution was a video of Josh's testimony from 3 years ago. Interestingly, Josh himself was not invited to take part in the case proceedings. From the start, Michael's defense seemed uncertain. It appeared they either lacked important information about their client or didn't believe he was innocent. The defense focused on the absence of direct evidence from the prosecution, which was actually true. No murder weapon or significant evidence was discovered. Additionally, there were no bloodstains or other traces on the Michael's clothing that suggested an attack had occurred. There were also no injuries that indicated he had struggled with the victim. The prosecution's hearings for the case lasted 3 days, after which the jury deliberated on the verdict. Initially, they struggled to reach a decision because the case was highly controversial. Eventually, they agreed that Michael was guilty of second-degree murder. Since he refused to cooperate with the prosecution, he received the maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Michael was stunned by the verdict. He accused the court of wrongful conviction and viewed himself as a victim, but he was sent to prison in Missouri regardless. No one paid attention to his claims anymore. This high-profile case drew the interest of several human rights activists who believed in Michael's innocence. However, over time, their interest in the case waned. The state correctional system is known for its extreme cruelty. From the moment he was imprisoned, Michael encountered the harsh realities of local prisons, which are among the most dangerous in the United States. On his very first day, he had a fight with his cellmate, Rome, and was sexually assaulted by prison staff. He realized that to survive in this environment, he had to adapt quickly, otherwise, he might not make it to his appeal hearing. Desperate to live freely again, he was determined to navigate this difficult phase of his life. He maintained that his conviction was due to a mistake. Despite feeling out of place in prison, Michael chose to alter his behavior by becoming more aggressive and getting multiple tattoos, as this was viewed positively by other inmates. This was his way of protecting himself. He repeatedly reached out to his father for help, but Edward did not support him. After 10 years of imprisonment, Michael's situation began to improve. During this time, he contacted the human rights organization Innocence, which advocates for the rights of those wrongfully convicted. The young man's case quickly drew the interest of several lawyers who thoroughly reviewed the case materials. They identified clear flaws in the investigation and the prosecutor's office. Human rights activists believed that the Michael's inconsistent statements made after his mother's death were a result of his fragile mental state and the trauma he had endured. Furthermore, it was evident that he was still a minor at that time. Given that his mother's skull was severely damaged, it was unlikely that a 14-year-old boy had the physical capability to cause such an injury to an adult. It was also suspicious that Michael's friend Josh didn't hear any sounds of a fight, suggesting that it likely never happened. Rita lost consciousness after just one blow from someone much larger and older than a 14-year-old boy. Furthermore, The fire chief's belief that the body was burned with gasoline was questionable. By the time emergency services arrived, the fire had already been put out, and any fuel had been consumed. The prosecutor's case relied solely on the dog's reactions, which indicated the presence of something that could start a fire. However, it's clear that the dogs couldn't accurately identify what they detected. The defense attorneys sought to challenge the key piece of evidence against the teenager: traces of gasoline found on his shoes. They argued that the testing method used to examine the soles was based on chemical reagents, which they believed was not reliable enough. They claimed this method could misidentify traces of gasoline as coming from certain polymers used in shoe production. Eventually, even the state crime lab supported this argument, noting that solvents and adhesives used in Michael's sneakers had chemical compositions very similar to gasoline. However, this information was not commonly known in the 1990s. Additionally, there was a video recording of Josh's statements. He had multiple conversations with police officers both before and after his friend's conviction. He mentioned that when he was 15, he endured lengthy interrogations by police, which were very tiring. Josh clarified that waking up in the middle of the night did not necessarily mean that Michael was harming Rita at that time. It was possible that his friend simply went to the bathroom. Ultimately, Josh expressed uncertainty about whether he could have seen an empty bed in the dark, suggesting that Michael might have been lying underneath it. Josh initially maintained Michael's innocence. However, the police created a misleading story using conversations taken out of context. Recordings from the interrogation revealed that Josh believed Michael was guilty. Josh later recanted his initial statement, revealing that police had threatened him into a plea deal to avoid being incarcerated with Michael. As a result, Josh did not testify at trial. Instead, the prosecution presented a video and audio recording of his testimony that showed potential involvement, without bringing Josh to trial. Michael's attorneys argued that this was because Josh could have contradicted key evidence that the prosecution relied on. Had the defense attorney had the opportunity to speak to Josh, the outcome may have been different. Following the incident, the media focused on securing Michael's release from prison by gathering evidence that disproved the prosecution's allegations. Many people close to Rita believed that Michael's father, Edward, was the real killer. Edward had a strong motive for the crime. After their divorce, the court ordered him to pay a significant amount of alimony to his ex-wife, which severely affected his finances. Many people attested to Edward's poor character and the way he treated his wife. During the divorce proceedings, he openly threatened Rita, saying that she would not live long enough to receive alimony. However, when Edward Polite was questioned by police after the murder, he gave an alibi. He had been more than 100 kilometers away from his home during the time of the crime, and witnesses corroborated his testimony. Therefore, any suspicion against Edward was dismissed. From the beginning, Michael insisted that his father was the only one capable of planning Rita's murder, suspecting that Edward was working with others to commit the crime. This theory was further supported by his legal team. Attention turned to Edward's brother Johnny. Interviews were conducted with neighbors and Johnny's wife, who testified that he returned home around 6 a.m. on the day of the murder and then disappeared overnight without giving a clear reason for his absence. Neighbors also reported seeing his pickup truck near the Rita's home late that night. During the investigation, police discovered a crowbar among Johnny's belongings, which appeared to be the instrument used to inflict the fatal injuries on Rita. The crowbar was sent for examination and was tentatively identified as the murder weapon. Despite this evidence, the prosecution maintained that Michael was guilty. His attorneys filed an appeal. They brought all their supporting evidence to the appeal. Unfortunately, Missouri's judicial system is notoriously strict, making it difficult to overturn a verdict or reopen the case. From the start, the court imposed obstacles on Michael's legal team, leading to the dismissal of their appeal. As the legal battle continued, it seemed that Michael's lawyers were in trouble. Then, in 2021, something important happened. Missouri passed a new law that gave a second chance to juvenile offenders convicted of serious crimes. Michael and his legal team quickly seized this opportunity, which played a key role in their case. On April 22, 2022, Michael's two sisters, Melanie and Crystal, brought the entire family to the rehabilitation center to welcome their younger brother, who had been paroled after 23 years. At age 38, as he walked out of prison, Michael looked up at the sky and expressed gratitude to his mother, recognizing her unwavering support for keeping him hopeful during his difficult years in prison. After his release, Michael wanted to ride a bike, a favorite hobby from his life before prison. He moved in with his sister because he had nowhere else to go and hoped to forget the decades he spent surrounded by criminals. To help with this, he started removing the tattoos that reminded him of his time in prison. Eventually, he found work as a carpenter and reconnected with his old friend Josh, who sincerely apologized for his part in what happened. Michael understood and assured Josh that he held no grudge against him. Josh expressed regret for not sleeping on the sofa that night. He believed that if the attacker had come in through the front door and seen Josh on the sofa, things might have turned out differently. Despite the new law allowing for conditional early release, the prosecutor could still initiate a new trial at any time for those who had been released. However, Michael recognized that there were significant gaps in the police evidence against him. The case against him relied solely on circumstantial evidence, which could be challenged. These accusations had a serious impact on his reputation, but he remained hopeful that the court would reconsider the case, especially since the real killer was still at large. The lawyers proceeded with caution to avoid harming Michael or provoking Missouri's justice system. Eventually, the local sheriff acknowledged the need to reopen the investigation into Michael's mother's murder. This renewed focus required police to re-examine a large amount of evidence that had been neglected for over 20 years. One key piece of evidence, the Rita's car, was also available for analysis. The prosecutor's office collaborated with the defense team, marking a significant turning point for Michael. He had been imprisoned for a murder he did not commit since he was just 14 years old. After spending 23 years behind bars, which represented most of his life, he longed to return to a normal life and felt he was finally on that path. However, he still needed to clear his name completely. Additionally, Michael was determined to find his mother's real killer, convinced that his father was responsible for setting him up. This betrayal had devastated his life while his father continued to live freely. The investigation into the crime was still active, and despite the obstacles presented by the local justice system, many law enforcement officials, including the prosecutor, supported Michael. With their backing, he felt confident that the true criminal would eventually be brought to justice. The investigation is ongoing, and there are indications of progress. However, even if justice is served, it won't bring back the lost decades for Michael. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Andrew Steele. Ashley Kristen was born in California. From a young age, she helped her mother with housework and took care of her siblings. Her relatives appreciated her support, although childcare could be a challenge. Young Ashley was willing to help her mother in many ways, which helped her mature faster than her peers. This early maturity may have contributed to her first love story, which began when she was just 12 years old. She met a boy named Andrew Steele and they felt an immediate connection. Unlike many of her peers, Ashley was not into parties or frivolous activities. She was quite modest. Their relationship continued throughout high school and was serious from the start. After finishing high school, Ashley's family moved to Minnesota, but she and Andrew managed to maintain their relationship despite the distance. They kept in touch through phone calls and letters, seeing each other occasionally but not often. During this time, they focused on their studies and college preparation while still taking time to connect. They were both committed to building a future together, knowing that getting a degree was essential to their plans. After graduation, they planned to move in together and start a family. Their dreams began to come true in 1998 when Ashley graduated with her bachelor's degree. After receiving their degrees, they decided to have a wedding and planned a solemn event that they had been waiting for many years. Ashley and Andrew exchanged vows at the altar, and with rings exchanged, a new chapter began in their lives. Meanwhile, the young husband got a job with the county sheriff, while Ashley was completely absorbed in her work and continued to build a career in finance. At first, things went smoothly for Ashley. She demonstrated impressive expertise in her field and handled even the most challenging tasks with ease. After years of working in finance, she took a job as a teacher at a local preschool. The preschool environment allowed her to reconnect with her previous experiences caring for siblings. In the early 2000s, Ashley's dream came true when she welcomed two children, Jack and Rachel, into her family. The couple's love story seemed complete, but fate had other plans. During this time, Ashley began to notice worrying signs in her husband, Andrew. At first, she noticed a slight tremor in his hands. Although he tried to hide his struggles, everyone around him soon noticed. The tremors were so severe that he had difficulty holding objects. As his initial anxiety increased, Andrew began to have difficulty speaking and his hand tremors became more severe. Communicating with others became increasingly difficult, and at times he was completely unable to speak. Even simple daily tasks became difficult for him. At times, the tremors were so severe that Andrew had difficulty eating. His wife did everything she could to support him, standing by his side in his fight against the disease. But it was clear that he was losing. On June 4, 2014, Andrew received a life-changing diagnosis. He had Lou Gehrig's disease, also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. At the age of 39, he was diagnosed with this rare, incurable disease that affects the central nervous system. ALS leads to degeneration of both upper and lower motor neurons, resulting in paralysis and muscle atrophy. Unfortunately, many people with the disease only have a life expectancy of 2 to 5 years after diagnosis. At this point in his life, Andrew was a deputy sheriff and everything was about to change for him and his family. As his health declined, Andrew struggled to perform his work duties. This deterioration worried his loved ones. They felt helpless as they watched his condition worsen. He was eventually laid off, which put even more strain on his family. At that time, the wife was not working, and for the first time, the family faced such difficulties that forced them to count cents. Ashley struggled to provide for her family. She worked part-time, but unfortunately her job paid very little. This made it difficult for her to make ends meet. During this difficult time, Ashley continued to care for her husband and protect their children. However, Andrew needed expensive medication and specialist medical equipment installed at home to improve his condition. Although the medication initially helped alleviate some of his symptoms, the costs were high and their financial situation became worse as they had to pay for these essentials. Despite their financial struggles, Ashley was determined to prolong her husband's life, maintain their standard of living, and provide for their family. To do this, they contacted a charity that supports patients with rare diseases. With an official diagnosis from a doctor, Andrew registered with the organization. Unfortunately, the charity was later shut down due to violations and possible financial fraud. This was a disastrous failure, especially since the charity had promised to cover the cost of installing medical equipment and the couple had pinned all their hopes on this support. After facing this challenge, the couple had to seek help from friends and acquaintances, as they felt they had no other choice. They needed to raise around $80,000. Andrew was surprised when people came together to support him. A friend suggested that Ashley take charge of the fundraising efforts. She created a special social media page where people could donate to her husband. She also held various contests and themed events to draw attention to their cause. This approach successfully raised funds and helped cover some of their expenses. Ashley remained determined to reach their goal until the very end. Her dedication stemmed from her desire to prolong her beloved husband's life. The outpouring of support from friends surprised Andrew, and he was grateful for their willingness to help him through his illness. He had never expected so many people to support him. Through this crowdfunding effort, they quickly raised over $23,000, which was used to purchase much-needed medical supplies. Eventually, the medical equipment installation for Andrew, a former police officer, was completed and the donations continued to pour in. Over time, Ashley became the manager and organizer of a large fundraising event. At first, she received little support, but over time, she was able to support other foundations working for similar causes. She constantly discussed her husband's condition and shared updates on social media. By this time, they had been married for 26 years, enjoying a long and happy life together. Doctors encouraged Andrew to do the things he had always wanted to do, but had not yet done. Andrew recalled a memory from his school years when he and his friends performed on stage, imitating the legendary rock band Guns N' Roses. He recalled the enthusiastic applause of the audience, making it the most thrilling moment of his life. He longed to experience that joy again. On August 16, 2014, Ashley and her friends held a concert to fulfill her husband's long-cherished dream. Thanks to invitations sent through the support fund, the entire group that had performed together decades ago reunited for the event. More than 300 people attended, and the musicians were moved to tears. The scale and importance of the event attracted media attention, as Andrew's battle with the disease was considered interesting by journalists and widely reported. Andrew's health was deteriorating and he was facing a tragic end. After giving the interview, Andrew decided to throw a farewell party for the two most important women in his life, his devoted wife Ashley and younger sister, Casey Tolles. The sisters looked very similar, differing only by age and hair color. Andrew invited both women to the party, which surprised Casey's husband because she was the only one going. However, this was considered the last wish of a dying man, so no one questioned it. On Friday, August 22, 2014, Ashley and Casey gathered at their home in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, to enjoy a weekend with him. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. However, around 1 p.m., Casey called 911 in a panic, trying to stay calm. On the phone, she reported that a shooting had occurred at her sister's house. She explained that Andrew had picked up a gun, shot her, then pointed it at his wife Ashley. She ran away from him and called for help. Police and ambulances rushed to Andrew's house. Outside the front door, they found Casey, wrapped in a towel. She was bleeding and bruised, crying that she was dying. She was quickly placed on a stretcher and taken to the hospital. The interior of the house was in disarray, making it difficult for the police to immediately understand the situation. Meanwhile, they returned to the house without realizing that Andrew was still inside and cautiously entered, gun drawn. They were unable to go out into the hallway due to the thick smoke that made it impossible to see. A perimeter was set up around the house to prevent anyone from entering or exiting undetected. A tactical team equipped with gas masks and equipment for extreme conditions arrived. Armed police surrounded the area. When the police called out to anyone inside with their hands up and received no response, they had no choice but to enter the house. They needed to act quickly, as something was clearly burning inside and the fire department was waiting outside. However, it was still too dangerous to put out the fire, as there could be people inside, including potential threats. In the couple's bedroom, the police found the body of a 30-year-old woman who had been shot in the head. A black tie was tightly wrapped around her neck. Although the task force arrived quickly, they were unable to save her. She died instantly from her injuries. The source of the smoke in the room was determined. Andrew had set up a portable grill inside, filled to the brim with charcoal, filling the room with thick, acrid smoke. Andrew himself was found lying on the floor next to the oven, with a pistol close to his hand. An officer moved his weapon aside, and at that moment, Andrew woke up. He had inhaled smoke and was severely impaired. The officer quickly subdued, handcuffed Andrew, and extinguished the oven. Andrew was rescued from the smoke-filled room just minutes before he died of smoke inhalation. During the 911 call, Casey mentioned that Andrew may have tried to end his life. She did not know what was going on in the couple's bedroom after younger sister's husband attacked her. According to Casey, after being shot, she heard more gunshots and saw Andrew pointing a gun at his wife's head. Casey then attempted to escape from the room, hoping that Andrew would be distracted and not notice her. She successfully hid in the basement and called emergency services. Meanwhile, Andrew was turning on the oven, intending to die of smoke inhalation. When the police arrested him, he was in very bad shape. He also had superficial wounds on his body. While investigating the events leading up to the brutal massacre, police discovered footage of Andrew purchasing 2 large bags of charcoal. It is unclear whether the attack on the 2 women was intentional. It was later discovered that Andrew had been planning a party, making the purchase of charcoal for grilling seem plausible. Ashley and Casey thought the items were for grilling, so no one found his purchases suspicious. Police are now faced with the daunting task of finding out why Andrew would commit such a horrific act against the people he claimed were his closest loved ones. Emergency crews rushed Casey, 38, to hospital, supporting her along the way, but she was unconscious. At the medical center, doctors fought for her life for hours on the operating table. Casey's injuries were so severe, she was sweating profusely. Unfortunately, she did not survive. Andrew, 39, was taken to a medical center under police guard. Fortunately, his injuries were not as serious as initially feared and were not life-threatening. He was released from hospital after a few days but was immediately arrested for double murder. Police suspect the crime was premeditated. That same day, Andrew made his first court appearance, conducted via video link. He was a respected sheriff's deputy who had become a suspect in a case that shocked the state for its senselessness and brutality. Andrew was arrested and his bail was set at $1 million. He was also banned from contacting his 2 children, aged 10 and 1, who are currently living with his wife's relatives. On September 11, 2014, the defendant appeared in court for his first in-person hearing. There was clear evidence linking the defendant to the murder of Ashley. The gun used in the crime contained only Andrew's DNA. The prosecution presented evidence that the murder was premeditated. They argued that Andrew had planned the crime for a long time. The main evidence supporting this claim was data from Andrew's cell phone, which contained numerous internet searches, including photos and videos of instructions on how to kill people, found on his device. Police discovered several online searches on Andrew's browser about effective and painless ways to kill people. Eventually, Andrew decided to use a gun. He chose a time when the children were visiting relatives to carry out his plan. Notably, he had written a will just 1 day before the attacks, suggesting he had planned to end his life after harming the women. However, things did not go as planned and Casey called for help. The only problem for the prosecution was that there was no clear motive. The couple was very much in love, and Andrew could not have profited from his wife's death. This also raised the question of why he would commit the murder when he himself was only expected to live a few months. Despite the substantial evidence against him, the court decided to continue the investigation and increased bail to $2 million. The trial was scheduled for April 13, 2015. However, on February 27, 2015, Andrew's health deteriorated significantly. He was brought into the courtroom for a preliminary hearing, where he pleaded not guilty, claiming amnesia. The defense argued that Andrew's illness left him unable to distinguish between good and evil, and between fact and fiction. He suffered from severe depression, which caused him to impulsively contemplate killing or react aggressively when provoked. Due to memory problems, the defendant was unable to recall these events and claimed that he had no control over what he did, attributing this loss of control to his deteriorating health. On March 27, 2015, Andrew amended his testimony. He admitted to killing his wife, Ashley, but maintained that he did not act out of malice. Instead, he claimed that his actions were entirely due to his medical condition. The defense faced a challenging task, as they needed to prove that Andrew's mental and emotional state had significantly deteriorated, as this contributed to the crime. They had to show a link between his illness and the murder, proving that he was not aware of his actions when he committed the double murder. To secure a favorable verdict, the defense had to convince at least 10 of the 12 jurors of Andrew's innocence. Now, the decision is in the hands of psychiatrists. Dr. Stephen Morse is responsible for assessing Andrew's condition. In his professional opinion, Andrew Steele's illness is not recognized as a mental disorder. Instead, it is a nervous system problem that can lead to cognitive and memory problems. However, there has never been a documented case of someone committing murder or acting aggressively due to this illness. On April 13, 2015, Andrew Steele's trial began. The defense quickly launched its defense, arguing that his medical condition was the primary cause of the tragic events, for which he was deeply remorseful. The attorney highlighted his professional achievements and best qualities. He recounted Andrew's struggle with a rare disease that eventually drove him insane, leading to the deaths of 2 women, presenting numerous friends and family members to testify in his favor. Acquaintances of the man testified that doctors had been monitoring the patient's condition for a long time. According to numerous witnesses, after the defendant learned of his fatal diagnosis, he fell into a deep depression. He was completely devastated, despite having an excellent relationship with his wife and children, as well as with friends. Unfortunately, fate decreed that he fell ill with a terrible disease, and he could have died. Against this background, the hero of the story significantly worsened his mental and emotional state, which could not go unnoticed. Witnesses said that for a long time, Andrew did not have problems with his memory, as the doctors had mentioned. However, these issues began on that fateful day in August 2014, which looked rather suspicious in the opinion of the prosecutor's office. This suspicion arose against the backdrop of the discovery of the man's notes, including a fresh will. All of this seemed to be part of an insidious plan, and the prosecution interpreted the text entries as preparation for murder. The prosecutor found confirmation of the assumptions about the premeditation of the crime, as well as evidence of a desire to voluntarily leave this life. This information became the main evidence on which the prosecutors relied. However, the defense did not lag behind in eloquence. According to the lawyer, these entries were evidence of the man's delirious state, which had begun long before the tragedy. He made spontaneous, incoherent notes that, if desired, could be interpreted in any way. The lawyer was sure that the evidence of the killer's innocence was on his mobile phone and tried to challenge the prosecution's opinion. The note about the will created by Andrew on August 21, the day before the double murder, became a turning point in this court battle. The last time it was edited was on August 22 at 6 a.m. The prosecutor's office claimed that the text contained direct references to a planned murder. The lawyers attempted to refute these claims, calling the text unrelated delirium. Unusual behavior of the criminal was confirmed by one of his sisters named Haley. The woman went on holiday with her brother and his wife sometime after Andrew learned of his diagnosis. During this period, when his sister was changing into a swimsuit and was in her personal room at the hotel, Andrew suddenly burst in. He just stood there for a while, looking at her with an empty gaze. Afterward, Haley came out, convinced that he was not himself. similar incidents happened repeatedly. Several women from the prosecutor's office continued to insist that it was not typical for people with Andrew's illness to display cruelty and aggression. Before this episode, the disorder had never been considered a reason for an attack. However, according to the defense, it did not mean that the illness could not provoke anything like this at all, and it could proceed according to its own individual scenario. Andrew himself told a new, astonishing story of what happened at the trial. According to the defendant, that day he was going to engage in a sexual act with his wife while her sister was on the first floor. He claimed that Ashley liked strangulation during sex, so he used a black tie around her neck. However, in a fit of passion, he pulled it too tightly, and his wife began to choke. Andrew was unable to notice it in time. After that, Casey heard a suspicious noise upstairs and kicked down the bedroom door. Andrew remembered only that moment when she burst inside, and then there was a gap in his memory until the police arrived at the call. The confession seemed absurd. The deceased, Casey, told a completely different story during the 911 call. There was no damage to the bedroom door. It didn't look like it had been kicked in. The prosecutor's office provided several dozen photographs from the crime scene and the victim's body, revealing obvious discrepancies with the defendant's testimony. In particular, he claimed that they had naked sex, but Mrs. Steele was wearing a dress in the images. It was unlikely that he dressed her after her death. There was also confusion regarding tying up his wife. Andrews stated that he used handcuffs, then plastic cables, and then started talking about ropes on her wrists and ankles, although there were no signs of tying on her legs. However, there were signs on her hands. Cable ties were found lying on the living room floor in front of the sofa, and there was a pair of handcuffs on the coffee table. Casey's blood was discovered on the dining room carpet, along with bloody marks that suggested she was likely shot in the living room. Andrew's DNA was found under Casey's fingernails, indicating they had fought. Casey had numerous bruises and abrasions, as well as gunshot wounds to her lower body. She also suffered a broken nose and a cerebral hemorrhage, pointing to a violent struggle. Police noted that Casey was found wrapped in a towel and not wearing any clothes, raising suspicions that Andrew may have attempted to assault her. However, Casey did not mention this during the call, possibly because she didn't have time to reveal the full truth. Another theory is that Andrew knew he was dying and he loved these women, which led him to decide to take them with him. It is possible that his twisted love and fear of dying alone drove him to commit this horrific act. Considering these factors, the prosecutor was convinced that the double murder was premeditated and executed according to a calculated plan. On April 23, 2015, after 2 weeks of thorough questioning and testimonies, the jury began deliberating the verdict. The families of the deceased women were profoundly disappointed when the jury concluded that Andrew lacked the mental capacity to understand his actions during the massacre. The defense successfully argued that his mental illness contributed to his deteriorating psychological state, which ultimately drove him to commit the act. As a result, he was found not guilty and was ordered to be placed in a psychiatric hospital. The victims' families felt that the verdict was unjust and did not provide them with a sense of safety. They believed that the perpetrator should be imprisoned. Casey's husband stated that the mentally ill man should be confined until his condition worsened to a point where he could no longer pose a threat. He could remain in the clinic for the rest of his life. 7 months later, Andrew's doctors reported that he was no longer a threat to society due to his rapidly deteriorating mental and physical health. By this point, Andrew was unable to care for himself or even move. It was predicted that he would soon need to be placed on a ventilator as his condition was rapidly deteriorating. On March 7, 2017, Andrew passed away due to illness. It is still unclear whether the illness could have led someone to commit murder or whether it was a clever deception by Andrew and his lawyer. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Celia Barquin. Celia Barquin was born on July 6, 1996, in Point San Miguel, a village in Cantabria, northern Spain, where her family has lived for 8 generations. She then moved to Iowa on an athletic golf scholarship. Many universities offered her scholarships due to her talent, but she chose Ames, Iowa. With a population of 65,000, Ames was quiet and cozy, reminding her of her hometown in Spain. However, at that time, she did not expect that this decision would be a serious mistake. Celia has a wonderful relationship with her family, who remained in her homeland. Her parents, Maria Rosa and Marcos Barquin, had 2 children, Celia and Andres. Marcos worked as a butcher, and Maria was a saleswoman at a clothing store. However, after their children were born, Maria became a housewife, focusing on raising the children and managing household tasks. The family was not wealthy, they lived modestly but were close-knit and supportive. Their children are their top priority, and their parents did everything to ensure that their children receive a good education and started their lives on the right path. Andres pursued a law degree, while Celia, a talented golfer, earned a scholarship to study in the United States. Celia's mother, who loved golf since childhood, passed on her passion for the sport to Celia. Being smaller than other girls her age, Celia learned to use specific techniques to win. When growing up, her petite figure enabled her to practice continuously to improve her abilities. Her dream was to become a successful professional golfer, not for fame, but to support her parents. Celia often expressed her desire to buy them a house and take care of them. To achieve this, she practiced diligently to improve her skills. Celia has achieved numerous titles and awards for her victories in various competitions. She won the European Women's Amateur Championship in Slovenia in June 2018, placed second in the women's team golf competition in Europe. Was the 2018 Big 12 Women's Golf Champion in the United States, and was named the 2018 Iowa State Athlete of the Year. There were high expectations for her, and many believed she had a bright future. When Celia moved to the United States, her relationship with her family remained strong. She talked to her parents daily, sometimes even 4 or 5 times a day when she had free time. Celia missed her family a lot. A nightly call to say goodnight and share the day's successes was a cherished routine. During vacations, she visited her family in Spain. Even while on vacation, she continued to train hard to improve her skills. Her mother supported her passion and often trained with her. Celia was comfortably settled in Iowa, living with her boyfriend, Carlos Nigri Nabalis, in a rented apartment. When Celia and Carlos met at the university, she was dating someone else, but Carlos fell in love with her at first sight. Her charming smile, piercing gaze, cheerfulness, and kindness captured his heart. And her determination and perseverance earned his deep respect. Although Carlos had to accept that she was with someone else, but he became her best friend and consistently supported her. For over a year, he stood by her side, then she became disillusioned with her boyfriend and broke up with him. After another walk together, Carlos finally confessed his feelings, and Celia pulled him by the shirt, kissed him, and without saying a word, left in a car. He was so happy she felt the same way that he ran around his room shouting with joy. That's how their romance started. To celebrate the beginning of their relationship, Carlos even set off fireworks to impress her and sent her a video where he told her she was amazing and 1 in a million. From then on, they were inseparable, and over time, they moved in together and started living together. Lately, their conversations were filled with dreams about their wedding venue and even the names of their future children. They were already engaged and planning the most important event of their lives for May 2017. Carlos had graduated from college and secured a job at an engineering firm in Ames. Celia was in her final semester at Iowa State University, also majoring in civil engineering. After completing her athletic career, She aspired to become an engineer and make a positive impact on people, wanting to demonstrate that women can succeed in construction as well. Celia excelled in her studies and successfully showed that women can thrive in this field. Celia had many friends and enjoyed surprising them with delicious Spanish dishes that she cooked very well. Among the university students, a popular video showed her skillfully tossing a Spanish omelet, flipping it in the air, and adding butter to make it burst like a fireball. Her friends loved this performance and often asked her to repeat it. In the summer of 2018, Celia spent her time in Spain with her family before returning to Iowa to graduate. She was a promising athlete on the Iowa State women's golf team and also competed individually. She was preparing for an upcoming competition. But unfortunately, those plans did not materialize. Celia's assassin has been following her and he has also planned an attack. On the ill-fated day of September 17, 2018, Celia arrived at the golf club after finishing a conversation with her mother. The staff, familiar with she, informed her that a group of 15 older men from Des Moines would also be playing golf. At 8:45, the group was sent to the starting line near the first 4 holes. Celia watched them arrive in golf carts and start playing. The retirees invited her to go ahead and start her game. Celia pushed the golf club to the first hole and then moved to the 4th hole to avoid delaying the older men. The seniors described her as polite and friendly. She then proceeded to the 7th hole, which was unpopular due to its distance from the other holes and its location next to Squaw Creek Park, known for dense vegetation. Athletes often avoided this area because it was sometimes frequented by unauthorized park visitors and aggressive homeless people. However, Celia was not familiar with this club and unaware of its thing, so she went there. To reach the 9th hole, players must cross a bridge along a wide path and then pass through a wooded area. One coach described this area as eerie, likening it to Sleepy Hollow. Celia went in that direction. Later, at around 10:30 a.m., a group of 15 people arrived in the area and found Celia's golf stick with her belongings, but Celia was not there. While the group played, they noticed that Celia hadn't appeared even after 10 minutes, which was unusual. Concerned, they decided to approach Celia's golf stick and look for her. Upon closer inspection, they found her t-shirt, baseball cap, and other items scattered on the ground, with her phone left. While it seemed some items might have accidentally fallen from her pocket, the presence of her t-shirt and the abandoned phone was puzzling. They searched the surrounding area but did not find anyone. Subsequently, they notified the club management to report this troubling discovery. The group reported seeing a young, blonde girl playing golf earlier, but now she was missing, and her belongings were left behind. The staff who arrived recognized her as Celia and began searching for her. In less than half an hour, they found a body floating in the pond near the 9th hole and called the police. Once the body was retrieved from the water, police identified her as Celia Barquin, the reigning European champion. She had been stabbed multiple times in the neck and torso. A search dog quickly picked up a scent and led officers to a tent in a wooded area of Squaw Creek Park. The tent was empty, but there was blood inside. The police suspected that a homeless man had been living there and might have attacked Celia, so they began searching for him. While the police were searching the area, a man approached them. He introduced himself as Colin Richards and mentioned that he lived nearby and was there to collect his tent. Colin, like Celia, was 22 years old, but they were complete opposites. The police suspected him of the murder because his face was covered in scratches. In a black backpack he carried, they discovered bloody clothes, a t-shirt and shorts, which he had replaced with clean ones. Search dogs also detected his scent. Additionally, he had a deep gash on his left arm, from which blood was oozing, and he attempted to conceal it from the officers. Based on this evidence, Colin Richards was taken into custody by the police. He was at a friend's house before the police arrived, according to Colin. Two male acquaintances took him to the park to get his tent. When he went to retrieve it, he saw the police. He denied any involvement in the crime and claimed he had never met Celia. He said the scratches on his face were from branches he encountered while walking through the woods. Colin was known to the police for substance abuse, alcohol issues, and mental health problems. He became homeless after being released from prison 3 months before the murder. He had served about 7 months in jail for burglary and had multiple prior convictions for similar offenses, with many criminal records. Colin grew up in a dysfunctional family and was known to the police since his teenage years. Detectives interviewed 3 men who were acquaintances of his. One of these men shared a tent with Colin, while the other 2 gave him a ride from his home to the park. The homeowner allowed Colin to wash and change his clothes because he was dirty and covered in mud, blood, sand, and water. After cleaning up and changing his clothes, Colin left with his bloody clothes in a black backpack to return to the park for his tent. He intended to leave the area afterward. According to the men, Colin was acting unusual that day, extremely nervous, and very to leave. He didn't explain his sudden decision, only mentioning that he had cut himself badly and dirted his clothes. Another homeless man who lived with Colin in a tent at the park mentioned that he always carried a serrated knife, which he used for household tasks. A day before the murder, Colin confessed to this friend his desire to rape and kill someone. But that man thought he was just joking. Colin was charged with first-degree murder right after Celia's body was found. Investigators believed the crime was premeditated. They thought he had planned to kill someone and was looking for a she that day. The judge set bail at $5 million, but Colin, of course, didn't have that kind of money, so he remained in custody until his trial. Meanwhile, Celia's family in Spain had no idea about these tragic incidents, but they were very worried because she hadn't called them or answered their calls and messages. Police aides tried to contact their colleagues in Point San Miguel and the embassy staff in Madrid to inform Celia's family about the terrible news, but it was already past midnight in Spain and no one was working. Therefore, Celia's coach had to call her parents to inform them of their daughter's incident. After many hours of not hearing from Celia, the parents learned that their daughter had been brutally murdered. Later, a serrated knife was discovered in a wooded area, bearing the fingerprints and DNA of Colin. Furthermore, the blood found under Celia's fingernails contained fragments of Colin's skin, confirming that these Colin scratches were caused by Celia, not by branches. Initially, he denied his guilt, but eventually, overwhelmed by the evidence, he confessed. He admitted to using substances that day and not thinking clearly. He saw a beautiful young woman alone in the woods and decided she would be the perfect target. Colin had never met or known Celia before, and she was an unintended victim of his violent outburst. Since the death penalty has been abolished in Iowa since 1965, he faced a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Colin's family attended the trial and shared details about his upbringing. His parents were never married or living together when he was born. For the first 10 years of his life, Colin lived with his father, who was strict with him. His father often sent him to bed alone while he went out to the bar. During this time, only Colin's grandparents looked after him. Later, his mother fought for custody and took Colin to live with her. By then, she had remarried and had 2 more children. They moved to the countryside, believing it was more peaceful. The family maintained strict discipline, and Colin's room was so tidy that they joked he should join the army. Colin was a diligent student, but as a teenager, he grew close to his alcoholic father and began having behavioral issues. His father attempted to discipline him, but Colin didn't listen, leading to his expulsion from the house at age 15. He fell in with a bad crowd, left school, and became addicted to alcohol and drugs. At 18, Colin had a girlfriend twice his age. In May 2015, he was arrested for domestic violence against her, found guilty, and sentenced to 60 days in jail. On another occasion, after being accused of shoplifting, he threatened to return and shoot up the place. Colin's life went out of control, but no one seemed to notice. After the domestic violence case, he was arrested multiple times over the next 2 years for theft, assault, harassment, and attempted burglary. Although he was sent to behavioral intervention courses, they didn't work. In November 2017, Colin was sentenced to 2 years at Mount Pleasant Correctional Facility for burglary in violating probation. Despite having disciplinary issues, including fights with other inmates, he was released on parole after just 7 months in June 2018 due to overcrowding in the prison. Only 3 months after his release, he killed Celia. After being released from prison, Colin was taken home by his mother and stepfather and lived with them. They had reconnected with him during his time in prison through letters. His parents trusted him and gave him an opportunity for a fresh start, believing his promise to avoid drugs and cut ties with bad influences. However, just 2 weeks later, they had to ask him to leave for breaking his promise. Colin then went to Ames, about an hour away from his home. He stayed briefly at the city's only homeless shelter, but there were not enough beds available. Seeking assistance from his mother, she bought him a tent. In his new city, the Ames Police Department soon noticed him. On June 29th, he was arrested for public intoxication. On August 11th, the police received a complaint from a Target store saying that Colin and another homeless man were camping on open land behind the store and were chased away. They then moved to camp in Squaw Creek Park to avoid bothering anyone. According to Colin, the police allowed them to camp there, but police representatives deny this, stating that camping overnight in the park is prohibited. On September 2nd, 15 days before Celia's murder, police were called to a Burger King where Colin threatened customers with a knife but was later released. On September 8th, his mother and stepfather visited to celebrate Colin's 22nd birthday. They took him out for dinner and to a laundromat to wash his clothes. His mother was concerned about his behavior. Colin was quiet and distant, responding to their questions with only one-word answers. They dropped him off at a tent in the park where he was living with another homeless man and then drove home. It was then that Colin confessed to his friend that he wanted to rape and kill a woman. The next morning, Celia was found dead, but she had not been raped. According to the police, he probably didn't have time to commit the act. Colin's parents said it was his own fault. They tried to help him, but it didn't work. He still chose to side with evil. Therefore, on August 23, 2019, Colin Richards was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He is currently serving his sentence at the Story County Jail in Nevada, Iowa. The whole town of Ames mourned Celia's death, with thousands attending a candlelight ceremony to honor the talented athlete. Celia's family was devastated by the news of her murder. They were furious that someone with no achievements or aspirations had cruelly taken the life of a talented and promising athlete with a bright future. Collins clearly had no regard for Celia's life. He randomly chose and killed her simply because he felt like it, believing she was an easy target. The Celia family was relieved by the verdict and grateful that the culprit was swiftly caught and could no longer pose a threat to anyone else. Now, he will remain imprisoned forever. Their only regret is allowing their daughter to go so far away, despite it being her dream. Statistically, the U.S. is not safe. The murder rate per capita in the U.S. is 26 times higher than in Spain. In their small town in Spain, there hasn't been a murder in 100 years. Celia's parents have kept her room just as she left it, with one addition: an engineering degree awarded posthumously by the state of Iowa. They often walk through the local golf club and remember when their daughter first started playing the sport there. The community in the small town of Ames, including the university administration and students, was outraged by the crime. The situation was particularly concerning because the golf course was next to a wooded area without any fencing. Due to the golf club's negligence, a girl's life was put in danger. This wasn't the first murder in the neighborhood. Back in 2008, a man was killed in a stabbing incident, and the homeless attacker was convicted of murder. After Celia's tragic death, her boyfriend Carlos found it too painful to stay in a town full of memories of her. He then moved to Florida. Celia's brother was greatly affected by her death, losing a lot of weight from stress. He decided to join the police force after earning a law degree, aiming to help others. This career choice was inspired by his sister, who encouraged him to find his purpose.